everybody? It's Mr. Wagstaff. Cool stuff to talk about today. We're continuing our unit here on World War II, and today we're going to start talking about Japan. The things going on in Japan leading to Pearl Harbor, which is going to bring America into the war, and World War II is going to fundamentally change in our lesson here today. Let's go ahead and get started. So if you're kind of new to World War II and you've never really learned much about it, yesterday when we were talking about the Tripartite Pact and we were talking about Hitler and Mussolini, and then all of a sudden they're like, and they go team up with Japan. You might have been like, what? Where did Japan come from in this? Well, as I told you yesterday, you got to spend some time on Japan to understand what was also happening on the other side of the world simultaneously while Hitler and Mussolini were rising to power, and that's what we're going to talk about today. So, we're going to talk about this guy named Hideki Tojo. But before I jump into talking about Emperor Hirohito and Hideki Tojo, let me give you some very basic background here of what is happening in Japan. Alright, so we had mentioned that there are some countries who don't like each other, and Americans tend to kind of lump them together because since they're different than America, we assume they're similar to each other. Germany and Russia is one of those that we have a tendency to interchange sometimes here in America when we think historically. Very different countries that don't get along. Another two countries that Americans we tend to like to lump together and assume they're the same or they're not is Japan and China. Japan and China have had a lot of issues over a long period of time. All right, they are very different cultures, religions, even food is different. Granted, they're both rice-based, but Japan being an island, all right, Japan being an island has a lot more fishing and stuff. It's just a very different culture, all right. So Japan in the 1920s and 1930s, while everything was going on in Europe, Japan also changed. They decided in the early 1900s, instead of being a small fishing country, hey, let's become an industrial superpower. And like the entire country was like, okay, let's do that. Let's change our entire way of life and everything we've ever done and go be something completely different. Japan is an anomaly in a lot of different ways because Japan doesn't tend to react and do things the same way most other countries throughout history have done it. This is a massive change in Japanese society, and they embrace it wholeheartedly. So Japan goes from basically being kind of bullied by China for a really long time to becoming like an industrial superpower, historically speaking, almost overnight, in a matter of about 20 years. So when Japan becomes powerful, one of the things that they're going to commit to is a massive military. And we're going to talk about that here in a second of how that took place. Well, Japan is like 90% mountains, and they don't have the natural resources in order to support this large military that they're going to have when they become an industrial nation. So, to get their supplies, they're going to have to trade with the other countries around them, like China. All right? So Japan, they turn around and they start buying a lot of natural resources from China. Coal in particular. They need coal, they need oil, and they are having to buy these supplies from the surrounding area. All right, you with me so far? All right, so all of this is taking place in Asia. All right, so China doesn't really like the fact that Japan has gotten powerful, because China's used to being the strong one in the region, and all of a sudden Japan is, and China hasn't treated Japan great over time, and there is definitely hostilities between the two countries. Interesting, and I want to go ahead and point this out because this plays a big part here. Japan needs lots of oil for not only their industry, but for their military. And they have the largest navy on earth. You would think, while everybody else is worried about what Hitler was doing and Mussolini was doing, Nobody paid attention to the fact that Japan was creating a massive navy. It wasn't even in secret. The United States had tried to have treaties with Japan in the Washington Naval Conference, but it was never fair to Japan. Japan has never really been treated fairly by the bigger, stronger nations. So Japan has basically abandoned all friendships and just says, we're going to do our own thing now. And they've created this massive navy, but they need natural resources from it. Where Japan is going to get their natural resources from is from a country called the Philippines here in Asia. What's important about this is the Philippines don't own the Philippines at this point. The Philippines are actually owned by the United States of America. So Japan needs oil. They need coal from China, and they need oil from the Philippines, but they actually have to buy the oil from the United States. So the United States takes the oil and then sells it to Japan. Everything is kind of working fine until things don't work fine. We're going to talk about that. But let's talk about two people as we head into talking more about Japan. So Japan's government, all right, they really changed a lot very quickly when they became an industrial society. One of the things that they kept is the concept of having an emperor, all right, it's not so much like Stalin or Hitler or Mussolini, the totalitarian leader, even though you could say that what this guy says goes. The problem is he's almost looked at more as a religious figure. All right, he's a figurehead. There's an entire government that runs everything. So Emperor Hirohito, for a variety of reasons, came into power when he is young. All right. He wasn't like he was 12 or anything. He was in his 20s. But he doesn't really assert himself as a leader. And there's a whole bunch of backstory here that you take a whole course on Japanese history and leading up to this. He's not necessarily a big fan of the way the government does things, but he is kind of expected to be this, strong, firm, behind-the-scenes type leader. Because of that, the government basically gets taken over by the military. Emperor Hirohito is not a strong, assertive leader, allowing the military to take over the government. All right. So Emperor Hiro is still in charge. All right. Technically. But the guy that actually makes all the decisions is the head of Japan's military, a man named Hideki Tojo. So throughout World War II, all these decisions that get made, all right, they're not necessarily kept from Hideki Tojo, they're not kept from Emperor Hirohito, but he really doesn't have any authority, he feels like, to stop what is happening if he disagreed with it. So in World War II, we pretty much treat Hideki Tojo as the decision maker, the same way Hitler's the decision maker in Germany, the same way Stalin's the decision maker in Russia. Hideki Tojo is the guy, since he's the head of the military, and the military really runs the country in Japan at the time, gets all the focus at the time. All right. So Japan decides they need lots of natural resources. So let's go back to this picture. They buy a bunch of coal from China. All right. So that they can run their massive navy. They have the biggest navy in the world. Not only that, they have a much stronger army than anybody else in Asia. So what Japan does is they buy all this coal from China to fund their military. China doesn't like this. China doesn't like the fact that Japan is getting really strong. So China, in response to this, jacks up the price of coal to Japan. Basically just being a jerk, all right? It's some astronomical inflation rate trying to prevent Japan from being able to buy as much coal so they can't keep growing their military. Japan's response to this, to China, from just jacking up the prices, like, fine. And Japan invades China, specifically the northern part of China called Manchuria, and takes it over. Japan goes into China, takes over Manchuria. All right. And by doing so, guess how much coal costs now for Japan? $0, because Japan has taken it over. Now, America has a problem with this on the other side of the world. Because America trades heavily with China. And China gives America good rates. Well, now that Japan owns China, America's not going to get those same good deals when they trade with China since it's owned by Japan. So this is going to hurt the American economy when Japan takes over China. So America tries to play hardball with Japan and says, all right, Japan, I know you need oil from us. You need to give China back. And until you do, we refuse to sell you oil anymore. All right. And Japan's like, don't do it, America. And America's like, no, seriously. Don't be a jerk, Japan. Give China back. We will sell you oil again. Keep in mind, the oil that they're actually selling Japan, America is actually getting from the Philippines, which is right next to Japan. And Japan starts thinking about this. What if... But before we get to that, the question is, what was Japan's idea for how to gain the many resources they needed, specifically from China? All right. So how does Japan get these resources they need from China when China started jacking up the prices? All right. And then why does America not want that to happen to China? Like, why does America care what's happening in China? So pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. So Japan at this point has already taken over China, Manchuria. This map will help clarify a little bit more. So it's not all of China, but it is a section of China called Manchuria. Currently there at the time, what is Korea, which is important for future units. So Japan, everything here in orange, Japan either has taken over at this point or is planning on it. If you notice, the Philippines, they're in orange here. I'm jumping a little ahead in this map, but it makes sense here. Japan says, hey, America's being a jerk too. We're just going to go take the Philippines from America. If we just go take the Philippines from America, we don't need America to sell us oil anymore. We'll just get it for free. Japan's end goal here is to basically just take over all the Asian countries. The Asian population, people that would be classified as Asian, are 60% of the world's population. Japan has no desire to take over anywhere else other than Asia. They want to take over Asia. However, if Japan invades and takes over the Philippines, which is something America owns, and America makes a bunch of money off of it, how's America going to respond to that? Not well. America's going to come over and fight. America has a very formidable navy. America has the second most powerful navy on earth behind Japan. Japan knows if you just go take something from America, America's going to get worked up. They also realize that America doesn't want to fight. They have been saying it for years at this point because World War II has already taken place over in Europe. America wants to stay out of it, but America still has this large navy. Japan's logic, all right? And you see a lot of nationalism at the time, the idea that your country's better than everybody else's, and there's this belief, and you still see it today, that if your country goes and punches another country in the face hard enough to start, they won't fight back because they'll know who's boss. That is not how the world works. If you attack a country, guess what they do? They attack you back. But we make this mistake over and over and over, and in modern day, you still see it, and nobody learns. Japan believes that if they wipe out the American Navy, America, who already wants to stay out of any war, will really want to stay out of a war because they have nothing to fight back with. And America will cower into a little corner. Now, that seems ridiculous, right? But America thinks this all the time. If we just hit that country hard enough, they'll know who's boss. Same logic Japan had then. So half the United States military, or the most of the United States Navy, is docked at a little island called Hawaii, and the naval base is called Pearl Harbor. Hawaii at the time is not a state of the United States. It will shortly after this event that's getting ready to happen. Japan's idea is they are going to go over to Pearl Harbor, where the United States Navy is, and wipe it out. They just want to sink the ships. They're not necessarily trying to go murder a bunch of people. They want to sink all the ships. All right? And by doing so, this will prevent America from stopping Japan from taking over all of Asia. Japan has no intention of taking over America. The goal is to stop America from stopping them from taking over other stuff that they want. All right? So the goal is send the entire Japanese Navy, the largest navy on earth, to Pearl Harbor, wipe out the American Navy, and then roll on over to Asia and take over everything they want without any interference. All right. So the question here is, describe the thought process of Japan when it came to the decision to attack Pearl Harbor. So they've already made that decision. They're going to attack it. What was their ultimate goal? Like, why did they want to attack Pearl Harbor? And how did they think attacking Pearl Harbor would actually benefit Japan? All right. Japan did not want to take over America. That was not part of this at all in any way, shape, or form. They had no desire for that. All right. But pause me, answer that completely, and we'll move on. All right. Pearl Harbor. December 7th, 1941, is famously, the president at the time is FDR. He'll call this the date that lives in infamy. So, Japan, let me get you a picture here. Japan is going to attack America at Pearl Harbor. It is the Japanese military attacking American military targets. They roll across the entire Pacific Ocean. Their navy is like the size of Rhode Island when it all rolls together. It's absolutely huge. This attack is going to take place on December 7th, 1941. This is a colorized picture, so it was a real black and white picture, and then they have gone back and put color into it later on, which I think they're fantastic because it makes it more real. If you notice, it is like perfect weather. So a lot of times, the fact it's December, because it's Hawaii. It's beautiful weather all the time. The Japanese come through, and they have 3 waves of airplanes that are going to take off from these brand new weapons of war called aircraft carriers. I have specifically not mentioned those yet because I want to make a point on those. Aircraft carriers are a game changer in the military. So planes can fly. They've been able to fly for a while now. Obviously, all planes can fly. But by this point in the 1940s, you have machine guns, you have bombs, you have all this other stuff on planes. The problem is things aren't fuel efficient. You can't fly far from the airport. Aircraft carriers, though, they can like literally carry aircraft, and it's a little mini runway where planes can take off, attack stuff, and then land back on the runway, and they don't have to travel far. All right. What is also very important to understand about aircraft carriers is not all planes are made the same. It is a really small runway, so you can't take off a bomber, all right, that drops literally bombs from an aircraft carrier, it can drop 1,000 bombs from an aircraft carrier, because that's basically the equivalent in plane lingo of like a transfer truck. Those things are big, they're slow to take. You need like a 1-mile runway to take off. What takes off from aircraft carriers are little fighter jets, like little Porsches, like my little sound effects. Anyway, so they take off. They have machine guns. They might have 1 bomb on it, but when they come at you, it's like a beehive. All right. The aircraft carriers are incredibly important. Not only are they wildly expensive. All right. They take like 10 years to rebuild. And America's aircraft carriers are stationed at Pearl Harbor. If America loses the aircraft carriers, you can't rebuild that. That's a haymaker blow that you're probably not going to recover from because they take so long to build. So Japan comes out. They show up at Pearl Harbor. They take off. They have 3 waves of planes that are going to take off and attack all these battleships they're just sitting here at dock at Pearl Harbor. Now, they're not trying to tick off America. They're just trying to get America to leave them alone. They don't want to murder all these people that are on the ships. So they actually send an encoded message to Washington, D.C. before the attack. Gives them about an hour that says, hey, get your men off the ships. We're going to blow them up. All right. When they attack Pearl Harbor, they're under the impression these ships are empty. They're not. Because that message doesn't get encoded or doesn't get decoded until after the attack is over in Washington, D.C. So Japan takes off their first wave, annihilates all the airplanes that are there to prevent them from, defending against the attack. The second wave of airplanes takes off from the Japanese aircraft carriers, annihilates all the battleships up and down Battleship Row. It is so massively devastating. There's nothing left. They don't even take off their third wave of airplanes, and all the planes land back on the Japanese aircraft carriers, and they turn around and they sail off to the Philippines because they need to go get the oil, all right? Because America can't stop them now. The absolute massive destruction is left here at Pearl Harbor. This is a picture of the attack as it's happening. This is another a black and white photo that is colorized. So all the famous story is after all the Japanese pilots get back and they're going down and they're being debriefed. They're basically telling their commanding officer what they saw. So the commanding officer was like, all right, so what'd you see? And they're like, well, we showed up. All the battleships are right where you wanted to. We blew them all up. They shot back at us a little bit, but, we didn't have any real losses. And the Japanese commander's like, what do you mean they shot back? They were empty. And the pilots were like, no, they were not. They were filled with people. 2,403 American soldiers died here. 300 aircraft are destroyed. Basically, every battleship that we had got wiped out. But when the admiral realizes thousands of Americans got killed, he goes, oh, that's not good. Because that's not something America's just going to ignore. He's like, oh, all right. But I mean, we wiped them all out. They can't do anything. And you got the aircraft carriers too, right? And all the Japanese pilots just look back with him with a blank look. And he's like, you got the aircraft carriers of America, right? They didn't. Because all our aircraft carriers, pure coincidence, and you can go conspiracy theory on this all you want, all just happened to be out at sea during this attack. None of our aircraft carriers got lost. You can rebuild the battleships. You can't rebuild aircraft carriers. We didn't lose an aircraft carrier. As soon as we were attacked on December 7th, 1941, remember FDR, the president of the United States, he was looking for a war. He was looking for a thing to happen. All right? He had already told Winston Churchill, hey, the American people don't want war, but as soon as they do, it's go time. Japan attacked us. America immediately turns around and declares war. But you're probably like, yeah, but they declared war on Japan. Well, it's the Tripartite Pact. The craziest thing to me, I imagine, Hitler can't be happy about this. He got Japan involved with them to keep America out of the war. And then Japan, without talking to Hitler, turns around and attacks America. All right? So as soon as Japan attacks America, America immediately, like the next day, declares war on Japan. Immediately after that, to honor the Tripartite Pact, Germany and Italy both declare war on the United States. And America and FDR is like, all right, fine. We'll fight all you. And America turns around and declares war on everybody. So the question here is, what happened at Pearl Harbor on December 7th, 1941? All right. Obviously, it was the attack, but kind of explain to me kind of the battle strategy of what happened there for Japan. And then explain what went right according to the plan that Japan had. Like they had a strategy here in Pearl Harbor. Tell me what went right for them from their perspective. And then tell me what didn't go well for them, because the famous last words, as the commanding officer or the admiral on the Japanese fleet realizes that the aircraft carriers weren't there, famously says, I think all we just did was awaken a sleeping giant. And historically speaking, that's exactly what happened. Because America, who said, we don't want to fight. We get attacked at Pearl Harbor, and everybody's like, it's go time. And America is going to join World War II and fundamentally change the direction of the entire war. So the President of the United States, let me throw a picture of him up here, is FDR, Franklin Delano Roosevelt. This is a colorized picture of FDR sitting with Winston Churchill. Notice they're sitting. As we talked about yesterday, you will always see FDR sitting down because FDR, he had gotten polio. And he is crippled. He can feel his legs, but he doesn't have use of them. So he is always photographed sitting down because the American people don't want to see a president in a wheelchair. So out of respect for him, everybody that he gets pictures with always sit down with him. So this is Winston Churchill in the pinstripe suits, and FDR, the President of the United States, the one that's looking at the papers here. He just declared war on the world, more or less. Now, you can't just say, look at your top general and be like, all right, Billy, go get him. Because at this point, no country in the history of the world has ever fought a war on multiple fronts at the same time and won. So the leadership is going to be very important here. FDR, as the President of the United States, he is the commander-in-chief. He gets the final say-so on everything. But he's not a military commander. So his job is to appoint people to these military positions that'll help him win the war. So to kind of help visually explain to you what happens. So this is a map of the world. It's basically divided into multiple theaters. You have the European theater. All right? This is where Hitler and Stalin and those guys are at. So the European theater is there in Europe. He's going to have somebody that deals with the European theater. Then there is the Pacific theater, which is going to deal with Japan, because most of this is going to take place in the ocean, so it's called the Pacific theater. In fact, they call them theaters. It seems weird. It's like, oh, welcome to the show. Anyway, so there's like two entire different wars that's going to take place. The European theater and the Pacific theater. So what FDR needs to do is figure out who's going to run what. Well, the first one, who's the top guy? So FDR is like, I got to run the rest of the country at the same time, the whole war effort. I need a head general that's going to basically run all the other generals. So his Army Chief of Staff, the top guy that gets put in charge here, is a guy named George Marshall. George Marshall never leaves America, all right? George Marshall stays in America the entire time, and he's got to deal with the other generals. So they have to decide after George Marshall, he's the top guy, who is going to be in charge of fighting Japan. All right? Who's the top general that's going to be in charge of fighting Japan? They choose a guy named MacArthur. So over in the Pacific theater, there is Douglas MacArthur. All right? And we'll talk more about him as we move on. In the European theater, they're going to put a guy in named Dwight Eisenhower. All right? Now, Dwight Eisenhower, when he shows up, it's really different. So the two guys below him, the guy on the bottom left there, that is George Patton, and then the guy on the bottom right is Omar Bradley. Those are two tank generals that go with Eisenhower, because all of this is going to be on land in Europe. So Eisenhower never actually takes tanks into battle. He's kind of behind the scenes, talks to troops and stuff, but he doesn't go into battle. Omar Bradley and George Patton will. All right. What's important about Eisenhower here in world history more than anything else is all the allies are there. All the countries are there that support, fighting Hitler, because basically the whole world basically picked a side at this point. Eisenhower isn't just in charge of the American military. He shows up and he gets put in charge of the entire Allied forces. Means Eisenhower is actually put in charge of everybody else's military in Europe. So there's one person that makes the final decisions for it, for what the strategy is going to be. So even though George Marshall is the top general in the United States, Dwight Eisenhower becomes the most famous one that's going to come out of World War II and will eventually be a president of the United States, because he actually gets put in charge of everybody else's military during World War II. And then one last guy that's necessary to mention here is a guy named Chester Nimitz. He's the only Navy guy, so I just threw him right here in the middle of an ocean. It's the Indian Ocean. He doesn't really fight much in the Indian Ocean, but fits on the page. Chester Nimitz, anytime there's a naval battle, and that's really going to deal with Japan, Chester Nimitz is the guy that makes those decisions. Whenever it's time to invade an island or anything like that, that's going to be the Army, and that's going to be MacArthur. So it's very important to have different generals with different specialties here, because you're fighting two wars on opposite sides of the world, and you need to have clear leadership on both of those. So the question here, what was the purpose of having specific generals to control specific theaters in World War II? All right, so answer that. That's as far as we're going to get today. See you guys tomorrow.